Hello everyone, welcome to the Andy Social Podcast. My name is Andy Dowling and, well, you guys know the drill. Sometimes you might see me prancing around like a little tart on stage with that heavy metal band called Lord. If you love a bit of old school heavy metal, you can go over to lord.net.au if you like bands such as Halloween, Queensryche, Maiden, Judas Priest, a bit of Saxon maybe. I love Saxon anyway. I'm sure there's a little bit of that in there. Or even like a new band, or newer band, I should say, like Symphony X. You can go over to lord.net.au. All the social media links are there. You can find us on Spotify as well. All that sort of stuff over there. So go and check it out. In addition to playing in a band, I also host the Self-Starter podcast because one podcast is clearly not enough. So Self-Starter is all about small business, self-employment and freelancing. So if that floats your boat, you can go to selfstarter.com.au and check that out. Now, Self-Starter has been announced as a finalist for the 2018 Australian Podcast Awards, for yours truly being the host of the year for the 2018 Australian Podcast Awards. So I am a finalist. I think there's about 6 people that are in the finalist last stages of the process. So we find out on the 5th of May down in Melbourne. And having a look when I'm recording this intro, I just need to see when this is. Actually, it's going to be in a couple of days' time by the time this comes out to air. So yeah, let's see what happens. So I'm going to go to Melbourne, have a few beers, hopefully not get too drunk and not make a fool of myself. I'll have my wife with me, so she'll keep me in line. So AustralianPodcastAwards.com if you want to get some last minute tickets. If some of you Melbourneites want to come out and have a couple of bevies, you can go and check all that out. Or if you're curious about learning more about some of the amazing Australian podcasts that are out there, because this whole space of podcasting in Australia is blowing up, and I'm so glad I got in early. So you can go and check out some of the amazing shows that cover all range of different topics over at AustralianPodcastAwards.com. There's heaps and heaps of stuff there, so go and check it out. Now, before we kick into it, as you guys know and expect, this week's shout-outs. Now, each and every week, I thank somebody publicly, put them on record, somebody that supports this podcast, I should say, if I speak in English. Oh, let me catch my breath in one way or the other. So whether it be a review on Apple Podcasts, or it could be on Facebook, or it could be anywhere on the internet. It could be buying an Andy Social t-shirt or one of the USB passes that has the first 100 episodes of the podcast on there. You can shout me a beer via andysocial.net on the PayPal button. There's all sorts of different ways to support the podcast. It could be something really simple, just like really nice messages of encouragement, sharing the podcast around to other people, making the community bigger and better each and every week, which a lot of you guys do. So thank you very much. Nonetheless, this week's shout out is for Raymond Ho. He is from Brisbane. He's a big supporter of the podcast. I've seen him tuning in, and he's bought an Andy Social t-shirt. And I must say, thank you so much, Raymond, for your support. It means a hell of a lot to me. And every t-shirt sale just goes back, well, some of it goes back into my pocket, but poppet. I wonder what a poppet is. Anyway, jeez. Struggling here today, guys. It does go back into my pocket, but it goes towards paying for all the costs associated with the podcast. But it also, I've been pulling money aside to get some more merch done. So if you guys think that there might be something cool that I can make some sweet dosh out of that's, branded Andy Social, or something that's loosely tied to it. I mean, let's get creative, folks. Then you can go and let me know. And every sale actually helps and gets reinvested back into the podcast. So it goes a long way, and it means a hell of a lot to me. So long story short, thank you very much, Raymond, for your support. Please shoot me a message with your address, and I will send something out to you, something surprising of some sort. I will look around the house. I'll find something that will be mildly amusing, no doubt. So please shoot me a message to remind me, and I'll get something out to you very shortly. Now, before we kick into this week's episode, I must say that this is the last episode over the last 4 weeks where I've had my very first ever sponsor for the Andy Social podcast. So after 120 plus episodes of the podcast, I finally have a sponsor, and it's only been for 4 weeks, but for a good reason. So this episode and the last 3 episodes have been brought to you by Designed by Jaden. And Jaden Fye is a freelance artist that's located in Darwin, and he does a lot of amazing artwork for bands. He does album artwork, merch, all sorts of stuff. So if you want to check out his artwork, and if it floats your boat, you can go to designbyjaden.com, which is Jaden spelled Jaden. IDEN.com, and you can go and get a bit of a taste of what his art's all about. Now, if you're interested in getting a free custom piece of artwork, whether it be, I don't know, like a t-shirt design or album artwork, or if you're a business owner, maybe you want so a new design for your logo for your business or something like that, Jaden's going to offer a free custom piece of artwork for somebody that listens to the Andy Social podcast. So in order to do so, you need to shoot me a copy of a review of the Andy Social podcast that you put up somewhere in the depths of the internet. Now, it can be an obvious place like Facebook or on Apple Podcasts or the equivalent podcast player out there, or it can just be anywhere random. It might even be a review that you leave on a message board somewhere. And I know I felt really silly and ancient saying a message board, but they do exist. Trust me, they still exist out there. Maybe it's something on Reddit as well. Who knows? So whatever you do, flick me a screenshot of that review. And if you get it to me by Sunday, the 6th of May, which is only a few days time, so hopefully you're listening to this in time, I will pick a winner that gets a free piece of custom artwork from Jaden. So if you're interested, go to designbyjaden.com and you can go and get a glimpse into what he's all about. And please shoot me a copy of a Andy Social review somewhere on the internet. Now, remember, I'm not telling you to leave a positive review. Just leave a review somewhere. Now, hopefully it's positive, but I don't want to coach you into a review. Just leave one somewhere. It all helps nonetheless. It brings attention my way. So designbyjaden.com. Thank you very much, Jaden, for supporting the podcast and being my first ever sponsor. And if anybody else out there wants to be a sponsor of the podcast, hit me up. Love to hear from you. Now, this week's episode is with Sam Rilatt. Now, I probably butchered your last name, Sam. In true Andy Dowling fashion, I can never pronounce a name properly, so let's just be consistent here. But anyway, a lot of you guys will know Sam. Sam was the frontman for Sydney melodic death thrash metal band Daemon Pyre. He was also in a previous band called As Silence Breaks, I believe. He's also run his own label back in the day. He was also the host of Hard Noise with CJ from Die Artist Murder that was presented by Hysteria Mag. So Sam's been someone that's been heavily involved in the music industry in Australia for quite a number of years, and many of us that are in the music industry will know Sam and have met him, and we've played shows together and all sorts of stuff over the years. And Sam made a decision a few months ago where he made a public statement, an announcement to a lot of people and peers and friends in the local music community that there was a number of things that he had to address in his personal life. And as a result, he made the decision to step away from these things that have been a huge part of his life, being a lot of these different aspects of his music career. And, you don't see this often, at least from my end. I mean, usually what happens is that, a musician or someone involved in the music industry just burns them out to the degree that they just fade away. And then eventually years later you go, whatever happened to that person? They just disappeared. I don't know what happened. But Sam took a different approach. And I think it was probably something that helped him get through this transition. But to be able to say, look, guys, I need to step away from all this. I need to let it all go. And I need to focus on other areas of importance in my life. And I'll let Sam get into all that because it's a really, really good chat. But I really look up to him with this decision that he made. And he's already somebody that's so proactive. He's a real thinker. And that sounds so silly, a real thinker, like he uses his brain. But he's somebody that's highly intelligent. He's always questioning things. And as you will see in this conversation, we go off on a million different tangents. Basically, we got two really chatty guys together and we just talked shit for about almost 2 hours. So this is really, really cool. I had a lot of fun catching up with Sam and having a chat. And I really hope that you guys are able to sit down, get a drink, and just relax and listen in as well, and hopefully get a lot out of this conversation. So I'll have everything that we discussed, all the little references and names and links and stuff that he's done in the past. I'll put a bunch of video clips up and links to the podcast as well that he was a part of. Everything will be over at andysocial.net, so you can jump over there, check it out as always. And I really, really hope you enjoyed this episode with Sam Rilatt, formerly of Daemon Pyre, Hard Noise, As Silence Breaks, everything and anything to do with the Australian metal scene, and much more. Please enjoy. Thanks. I've just started recording, by the way. Yeah. Hi, how you doing? There would have been a certain extra element of quality that was expected underneath Hysteria. Like with
are we starting this now, or are we?
Yeah, a little bit. Cool. I'll clean up later. I'll work out whether we want to keep stuff in or not. Yeah.
So go.
Yeah. No. Well, I mean, doing the podcast for Hysteria, you would have had an additional set of expectations as far as quality. I mean, did you guys have that sort of freedom?
Yeah, I mean, obviously when it started, we had an idea about what we wanted to sound like, what we wanted to do, and then of course, because it was under the Hysteria banner, there was an expectation of the certain elements of quality, you know, sonically, and we needed to make sure that it sounded okay. And it did take, given that I didn't have a lot of experience with podcasting specifically, I didn't have an awareness of how to get everything right. So the first few episodes, I was really just tweaking and trying to get it right. And Joey, the owner of the company, was just, he really wanted to make sure that the quality was there, that it was on par with something that you would hear Triple J produce or someone like that. And so, yeah, it took a little while to get used to it. And then again, we tried different tools, and I started, with a condenser mic that was way too touchy. And then of course we went down the path of getting the Rode gear, and that became very useful because it was designed for the purpose rather than trying to jerry rig things.
Was it a case of, after those first couple of episodes, getting some constructive feedback and then having to digest that and go, oh geez, because it would have been, I mean, you come from this music background, especially being sort of doing frontmen sort of roles in bands, so you're used to being in front of people and having a mic in your face. But podcasting's like another dynamic altogether, so there's an element of vulnerability to it. That
a little bit, and particularly because the first few episodes, CJ and I were literally just sitting in my office, and talking face to face, like mates, and which came easy because he and I have known each other for a long time and grown up in the Western Sydney metal scene together, and that made it a lot easier. But then the logistics of trying to get it all together on a regular basis, because the show was needed to be weekly, we then started to just Skype each other, and then Skype the guests, and that became like second nature, because you'd basically just be sitting in the comfort of your office and
get a formula.
Exactly. But that takes, as you would know, that takes a while to get a flow, and as the show progressed, we started to figure out, a weekly brief, so we knew exactly what we were going to cover. What started as a podcast then became a radio show. So of course then the format had to change to suit the fact that there was going to be music programmed in. It was, again, lots of trial and error from two people that just didn't know what they were doing.
And I mean, I just compare with me getting started with my podcast. I mean, the first ever episode that I put out was more or less me just trying to explain what the hell I'm trying to do, which I didn't know what I was doing. I had no idea. I was trying to work it out like as I was talking, and I went through and tried to get rid of as many as possible through that whole thing. I became so overly critical of all of my verbal tics, everything, and I went through so much mental pain just to try and get that first episode out there. And I made sure I waited until I got 2 or 3 episodes and I put them out at the same time. But it was such a vulnerable period to go through, to go, I'm putting something out there and labeling myself now as some form of podcaster, and people should listen to me. Why? And so I'm thinking of all these things while I'm trying to explain something that I don't even know what I'm explaining. And it was just such a hard thing to go through. And it wasn't until several episodes in, although it was still pretty clunky, and I still have my clunky moments now, it was only a few episodes in when I started to find a bit of stride and a little bit of confidence and go, who cares?
I think the conversational element of a podcast is what makes a podcast unique. And that's something that we often struggle with as a team, was trying to figure out how to get that flow right. And, because I was always of the opinion that the podcast is popular because it's just like listening to a couple of people speak, and what do people enjoy? People enjoy just being part of
conversation,
or eavesdropping in on a conversation. That's right. And that's essentially what a podcast is. But I was the same. The show would be anything from 2 to 4.5 hours worth of content recorded on a Tuesday evening or whatever, and that would include obviously one or several interviews, with guests, as well as all the show content. But then I would spend, on average 12 hours a week, roughly, getting the show ready. And that includes obviously recording and interviews and whatever else, and responding to emails and the like. But that's the thing. It was literally a part-time job on top of all the other stuff that I had in my life. So it was, and I did the same. Going through filtering out ums and pops and strange noises, and then, as you said, you kind of you start to let some of those things slide for the sake of it sounding like a conversation as opposed to like a recorded speech.
Did you get to a point? I mean, obviously, as you said, you went from sort of mates having a chat, and then you realised that this was sort of changing into a bit more of a radio show format. Was that liberating in a way because you had some structure and a formula, or was it sort of
having a formula? Yeah, having the brief as a protocol was good because it allowed CJ and I to keep on track, and obviously too with the show, I often had to do it with guests.
Yep.
CJ's touring life is huge, and so sometimes for the sake of keeping the show moving, we'd get in guests. Like I had Adrian, the ex-vocalist from Northlane, he came in and guest hosted. Nikki from Pagan, she came in and guest hosted. This lovely lady from up in Queensland who does metal yoga, Rebecca, she guest hosted. A whole bunch of really cool people that joined me as guest hosts. And so that was even more essential that we had a format because they were then relying on me to keep the thing moving and steer the ship, so to speak. And so if you had just no one knowing what was going on, it just wouldn't work, So, but yeah, it was liberating in a way, knowing that you could just get in there and get the job done. But then in a sense, it was also a little scary because it meant that the show was getting slightly bigger, and then of course doing interviews with people like Jessica and Pimentel, which was amazing, and then Ice-T as well, and that was when I was like, oh, okay, I'm getting into the realms here of like fairly important people. I can't stuff this up.
There's certain expectations that you create where, from a listener point of view, that the standards or the bar keeps getting raised, and you sort of go, well, even though you might not verbalize it, but subconsciously there's a bare minimum that you expect when you tune in each week, and that bar continues to get raised, and it's like, oh geez, this is becoming this is not something where we can just like quickly talk shit for half an hour and slap some stuff together and just get it out there into the stratosphere. It's like there's a bit more methodical and structured process that has to, and certain expectations of quality and production as well.
That's right.
That'd be full on.
It was, but fun at the same time. But it's the amount of time that it was taking is just one of the many reasons why I stepped away from it. Is that I had other responsibilities in my life, and dedicating on top of a day job, on top of a band, on top of being a father and a husband and everything else, and then having to try and find 12 to 15 hours a week to keep the show running. As much as I really, really enjoyed it, it just wasn't sustainable.
So, good segue, because you're a professional podcaster. So a couple of months ago now, you made a pretty big call to move away from a lot of this stuff. So the podcast being one of them, but obviously the band as well. I was pretty surprised because, well, I don't know you to the extent of understanding a lot of the stuff that you do outside of those roles that you've held for so long. But to see somebody that's been so heavily involved in the Sydney music scene, the Australian music scene, and you've worked with labels, you've been part of your own, been in bands, had the podcast, heavily involved with all this kind of stuff, and they're making that call just to say, I've got to step away. The thought of me doing any of those things in my life scares the shit out of me. Yeah,
it was. It wasn't easy, and it still isn't sometimes. But basically. Yeah, I mean, as you say, I'm 34 now, and I've been playing I've been in and around the music scene, since I was 16 years old. And taking it seriously since about the age of 19 with my first, sort of proper band with friends, and then of course, you spend your entire life, I guess, using that personality as what defines you. You've created this persona, and you feel a sense of protection from that, like I know who I am, this is who I am, and then it evolves, and you become not just a frontman or a musician or instrumentalist or whatever. You then become a label owner or a studio manager, and as you try and generate revenue in an increasingly difficult industry, you take on extra tasks and you get involved in extra parts of the industry because you think you're going to need that safety net and that time and that revenue generation that exists outside of the day job. So yeah, if it was a really hard to wake up in November and go, I have to step away from all this, not only because of how stretched my brain was, but also my physical health. That's one of the big reasons I stepped away from it, was that my health has been suffering, dealing with being overweight and a whole bunch of other problems with my back. And I just had surgery, like a couple of weeks ago, and to resolve some internal issues.
Yeah.
And then you couple that with trying to be the best husband and father you can be. And, my wife and I had a personal tragedy we went through last year, as well as having a toddler. And now we've got another baby on the way, and of course a 40-hour-a-week day job that I also have an on-call, component to as well. So it's just like, essentially for me, I got to the end of a little run that we did with the band in November, and I had looked at that sort of 4 days, and just at the end of it, my brain just went, no. And at the same time that my brain just went, no, my brain also reminded me of the things that my doctors had been saying. You got to deal with this. You got to deal with this. If you don't,
everything came rushing back.
That's right. All the stuff that you kind of put out of your mind, you just don't deem important. It all just comes rushing back to you, and you say, "Oh, remember when they said you might be diabetic? Remember when they said you've got to lose some weight? Remember when they said you want to, if you want to live past 40, you've got to do X, Y, and Z." And it just came to a point where I just had to stop making excuses, because really that's what it was. I had allowed myself to stay involved in all these things and open all these doors without closing any, at the cost of my health and sanity, and and to be honest and fair, also my family. It was, the podcast that did have an impact on my family. The band did have an impact on my family. All these things that I was doing, because I thought I was making a difference and I thought it was important, they did have negative consequences too. And I think that as you grow and become older, you've kind of got to learn to listen to those things. And I can finally say at the age of 34 that I have woken up and realized that you can open doors, and close doors, and I've just spent most of my life just opening all these doors.
Well, I mean, when I read it and I was having a chat to you, I mean, that's the big thing that I saw at the time, was just, I'm lucky I don't have the additional things such as, I'm sure there's probably some underlying health issues I just haven't discovered yet. But I don't have that element of pressure on me, but I have everything else to certain extents. And I've gone through a similar sort of path where I've grown up with, the desire and the hunger to be a musician, to work with people in the music industry. And that's been my primary driver for everything. That's been my sort of the compass, where you would get a day job, but the day job was always secondary to
that's exactly how it was for me.
To being in a band. Everything you would adjust. You'd find a way, because the band was always the most important thing, or just being in music or whatever that was, and you had that vision or that identity that you would continuously add things onto as you progressed through this journey, and the deeper that you get into it, the more I felt this air of desperation around it, thinking that if I ever let go of this, then I would lose my identity.
Yeah. That's really what it does feel like, is that every human being wants to feel like they're doing something important.
Yeah.
They want to have a purpose. And I think, as you rightly say, like, once you've decided that purpose is, I'm going to be a musician, there are all these things that come with it.
Yeah.
And unlike other, I guess, careers or, or causes or purposes for living, being a musician has so many elements to it that just by default, it's exhausting.
Yeah.
And by default, you will have to let other things slide. Because, like, say, for example, if you decided that your core purpose was to be, a police officer, like, that's not an easy thing to do. You've got to go off and do a degree, you've got to do your training, and then of course just being an officer is difficult, but even though it has many facets to it, there is a sense of singular focus, Whereas being a musician, you have all these additional considerations, like I want to do this full time, but there's no more money in the industry. So of course, then you have to find all these other different ways of generating revenue, just to keep yourself alive and to support your family. So you've got to be not just a creative, you've got to be a businessman. You've got to have an eye on branding and marketing and social media.
Very DIY.
That's right.
Yeah.
It really is essentially like starting and then running your own business. But on top of that, there is the creative side. And I must confess that towards the end of being in Daemon Pyre, I was so bogged down in the administrivia of running the band. And that's no one's fault. It's just how it is. You do lose some of that passion,
Yep.
and the first thing that I did after choosing to walk away from these things, aside from joining a gym and getting a personal trainer and trying to, adjust my lifestyle so that I could stay alive for more than the next 10 years, was I picked up my acoustic guitar for the first time in like a decade and just like learnt a song.
Yeah.
And that felt really good to actually be reconnected with music on a creative level.
Yeah.
Which is weird to say that because you're in a band, you're playing all the time, you're writing, records and whatever else. And so to feel like you're not actually in the creative process, even though you are in the creative process, is odd.
Well, even that reminds me of like when you discover an album and you absolutely fall in love with that album and you play it to death, and it gets to a point where you hear the songs and the songs are just going in one ear out the other.
Yeah.
Like you know exactly where every little snare hit is, every vocal line, every guitar lick, everything like that. You understand it. It's just it's ingrained in your mind. And then for whatever reason, another album comes along, you get distracted, you listen to that, you become obsessed with a different band or a different album, and then years pass, and then eventually you go back to that album and you listen to it, and it's completely fresh. And you go, oh my God, like I can't believe that I was listening to that album for so long and not getting it to the level that I'm getting it now. It's sort of like the absence, makes the heart grow fonder,
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Yeah.
And getting so swamped into the process and that monotonous sort of existence of, especially being, working in the music industry where it's a lot of DIY and you have to spread yourself thin. And you have to stretch yourself, that you do remove yourself from the essence of what a lot of it's all about. And that's that creativity part of it.
It's also, for me, one of the big lessons that I've learnt in the last few months, or that has, I guess, become more apparent in the last few months, is that you don't want to do things badly. If you are stretched so thin because you have interests or responsibilities in so many different areas, just by definition, you're just not going to do anything well. Yeah. And that is what worried me as well. Aside from, as I said, health and sanity, I was worried that I was doing all this stuff, but none of it was being done well. You're doing 20% rather than excelling at anything. And that started to worry me. I'm like, I don't want to do crap quality stuff, and one of the most refreshing things having a moment like that where you go, okay, I just have to step away from things for a while, is to go, now I can do like one or two things really, really well. Yep. And for me at the moment, like that, as best I possibly can, that's doing my day job as well as I can, being a father as well as I can, being a husband as well as I can. And then things like, I've never been good at exercise. Yeah. But now I can get up in the morning and go for a walk before the sun gets up. I can go to the gym. Man, that's been huge. Like having the brain space and the motivation to go, I'm just going to get up and put a podcast on or tunes on and go for a walk for 45 minutes before the day starts, before I even had breakfast, is something I've just never, ever done. Yeah. And I don't think I could have if my brain was running at the rate it was running. And again, it's partly being spurred on by the dangers of not dealing with health problems as well.
Getting pushed to critical mass.
That's right. And then, having a trainer that's like telling you need to just focus on not setting goals, just make it part of your life. Yeah. And I thought that was actually something I thought was actually really interesting about approaching health in general, was just don't set goals. Yeah. Just make it something that you do every day.
Yeah, it's ingrained.
And there'll be no endpoint. Yeah. Which is way healthier. rather than just going, I want to lose 10 kilos.
That's it. And then what?
And then what? It's like, okay, well, now I can slack off. No, it should be, I'm going to shift my entire system of thinking so that when I get up, I just get my shoes on and I walk out the door.
Which means it's a long term, it's a gradual thing.
It becomes, it literally becomes ingrained into your life, rather than it being something that you can let slip later.
Yeah.
And for me, that's the reality, is I can't let it slip.
You're probably really fortunate, if you're looking at it from a silver lining point of view, that you got forced into this critical mass situation, that you were forced to make those decisions. But I mean, before you got to that point, if these thoughts ever came through your head, and just sort of blew by and quickly forgotten about, did you have that element of panic about letting go of things and then missing out on opportunities, like especially from a music point of view, and obviously being involved with the podcast and the success that also had? Because I always freak out and go, if I miss something, especially now with like how quick and instantaneous information is and getting people's attention and all that kind of stuff, that if I'm away for a few days or a few weeks or a few months, then potentially I'll go back to square one.
Yeah, that was, to be honest, that was actually one of the most cathartic things, was realizing I didn't have to care about that anymore.
Yeah.
Even social media, for example, it was something my wife would lament all the time. It's just, I was constantly on my phone.
Get your wife and my wife to talk.
And she's right. I mean, like, it was, an awakening moment for me was realizing that even after social media, I think, is a really amazing tool, right? But I also see it as something that's, as much as it's doing good, it's doing harm.
Yeah.
Which is odd, because of course we're talking about this on platforms that will share across social media and whatever else. And I realize the irony, but I, even after having left the podcast and left the band, found myself a few weeks ago saying to myself, okay, cool, you've got some time, you're going to play some Xbox, you're going to read a book, daughter's in bed, wife's asleep, just have some you time, the stuff that you never had, right? And 2 hours went by, and I literally, all I'd done is flick my thumb scrolling through social media feeds, and literally wasted 2 hours of my life just flicking through it's not even news, it's mostly just people's opinions and,
checking in at airports.
It's right. And I just don't need to know that. And again, so even after having left all this stuff, I'm still learning lessons. Like, I've turned the notifications off of Facebook. I've set some restrictions. I even come to the point where I'm like, do I even need this stuff in my life? Because like this morning before you came over, I got up early, went for a motorbike ride, and just pulled over on the side of the road and just stared at the bush for like 20 minutes. Yeah. And none of that needed social media. None of that was, I couldn't help take a photo because my bike's pretty hot. But, but it just being in the moment is so much more useful. But yeah, you're right. Like, you do fear that you're going to miss the next headline. You're going to miss, the next opportunity. And that's the thing. The funny thing is that, that ridiculous, FOMO or whatever. That fear. It is real, no matter what part of your life, is important to you, you do fear missing elements of it. And, with the band it was like, I constantly was like, oh, we're going to miss out on this opportunity, or miss out on this email, or miss out on this, whatever the case may be, miss out on this show, whatever. And it was the same with the podcast. Like, it got to the point where I felt like I needed to know what was going on in the world all the time, in every facet of every industry, and it's just like, my brain doesn't have enough processing power for that. No one's does.
That's it. And the people that are at that level or higher have got a team of people that feed the information through. That's it.
Yeah, so they're being.
You got researchers. You got everyone out there trawling the information and doing all that hard work, and then you present it because you're the face, and you learn the filtered information, which is less. But
that's exactly right. But you're not doing the groundwork. But I think, like what we were saying earlier, it is very much like being an owner operator, or an entrepreneur, and that's the thing. It's not exclusive to musicians or podcasters or radio show hosts or whatever. You're in that independent space trying to break through and turn it into a full-time career, because anybody that builds something from the ground up, I think they're facing that same kind of challenge. Maybe not across the number of different facets that, say, you know, the creative arts are, for example. You know, if you're I don't know, a plumber or something, you've got to know your craft, and you've probably got to run the business, or your partner might run the business or whatever, but you generally can focus on your core function. But the challenge of running something from scratch, you know, building it up and running it, is still difficult, no matter what. But yeah, it's still hard.
Did you have a few like mental breakdowns once you actually made that decision, and suddenly, not that life has slowed down, but obviously elements of it have slowed down, where you've got more focus on more important things, or you're prioritizing? But are there certain times where there's just a little bit of extra idle time where you go, oh my God, like...
No, I'll be honest, no, because there's a reason for that. I've never been one of those people that gets bored.
Yeah.
Like, I don't understand boredom. So to be brutally honest, there hasn't been those moments. There's been moments where I've been like, oh, I miss playing the shows, or I miss being a part of the writing or whatever, or, you know, particularly with Daemon Pyre, like, the guys are such good people, and the music is such good music. There are definitely times where I'm just like, damn it, you know, what have I done, or whatever. But the catharsis that came with just shedding all this stuff so that I could be a better dad, you know, and be a healthier person, and, you know, a better husband and whatever else, like that it was immediate. Like, the moment I made that decision, and I think most people, like, if you ask anybody that's ever left a thing that they were so deeply connected to, the first thing they'll tell you is that they know it's right, because the moment it's done, it just feels like the weight's lifted off their shoulders. And that sounds pretty cliche, but it's true. Like, the moment you've done it, you go, okay, life is now instantly better. Even though these things were so important to me, life is just instantly better. And that's how it was. Like, as there are times when I'm just like, I miss it, you know. And same with the show. Like, I love dialogue. I love conversation. You know, I love being a part of talking about what makes human beings unique and interesting and special. And I've had this burning desire to kind of drag people to the center of things for such a long time that, you know, I tried to use the podcast and radio show as my way of doing that. So again, I equally miss that, you know, and I think I used both of the platforms as a way of trying to foster conversation and get people to talk about stuff. And so I do miss that. And I think that, you know, years from now, when I'm, I guess, more balanced as an individual, and my family's more established and my kids are older, I'm fairly certain there's no way that I'll be able to keep away from music and or, you know, podcasting or some kind of social commentary, because I just enjoy it too much.
Well, I mean, that was one thing I was going to bring up, because I think one of the last things that you've written on this post about just letting everyone know what you're going to do, this big decision that you've made. And I think so I can't remember exactly word for word, but it was something along the lines of, I'm sure this won't be the last things that I'm involved with. I'm sure I'll be back, or I'll have things that I'll be involved with in the future. And I mean, there's nothing hidden in that. It is what it is. But when you read it and you go, wow, that is true, and we don't think about it a lot, is that you can take a break. You can decide to go down a different path. And the decisions that you make in these pivotal moments where you sort of go, which road do I take? That road can then change, and you can come back in another direction. And so for you, like, you know, the priorities shift. There's critical things that you need to address and deal with and work on and improve with certain aspects of your life. And you do that, and that's a chapter, and it's a section of time. And that might be, depending on what those things are for individuals, it could be a 6-month thing, it could be a 12-month thing, it could be a 6-year thing, it could be a 20-year thing, or whatever it is. But there's always that opportunity to come back or to approach it from another angle altogether down the track. Like, it's not just, this is a decision and, oh my God, now my life's completely changed permanently for good.
That's exactly right. And I think that was an equally important lesson for me to learn, right? Because, you know, this isn't the first band I've been in, or the first, you know, musical project that I've been attached to, or whatever else. And still learning, you know, as you go, still learning that you don't have to stay in things to the bitter end. You know, people aren't going to think less of you because you walked away from something, which is hard, because if you're motivated, you know, and if you're a driven you know, possibly in my case, you know, arrogantly driven towards goals, there's a sense of failure if you step away from something.
Yeah.
You know, you feel like you're saying to the world, this thing that I told you was really important, you know, that I was deeply connected to, it's not anymore. I'm stepping away from
I was full of shit.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
But in reality, it's like, as you say, you're just reprioritizing. And, you know, if a husband and a father can't focus on his family and his health, or can't bring himself to accept that those things are important, then he's probably got more important problems to worry about, right? So
absolutely. And it also, like, I mean, I try and put parallels with my life and the things that I've been going through, in a lot of moments where I've sat down and gone, oh wow, like I don't know whether what I've been doing for the last 10, 15 odd years is what I should still be doing. And I think for me, those moments where I've been forced to think like that have usually been from things that are a little bit sort of a little short bursts of uncomfortable situations where it's never actually a big issue that's forcing me to make a decision. But I think for me, the biggest comfort that I have is that whatever decision I make, I'm making it, and I make it for whatever reason is for me and the people that are in my inner circle that I care about the most. And, you know, if I make a decision that, you know, this podcast or the band or anything like that is not the priority anymore, I can walk away, and I can give myself the reassurance that I can come back to it at any stage. But I can also give myself the reassurance that I don't even have to fucking come back.
Having the self-awareness is the most important thing, though, right? Like I think that was the thing that dawned on me, was that, you know, I like to think of myself as being pretty self-aware, but then you realize that you've spent a decade doing something, and it may have been good for you, but it also may have been bad for you in some respects. And as you say, being self-aware enough to step away from it and address the things that you've got to address, knowing that you could come back to it or you could never come back to it, I think like that is liberating too. Yeah. You know, knowing that you've kind of learnt a lesson.
Because no matter what the decision is going to be at whatever time, you're doing it for the right reasons, and it doesn't matter what that is. Like, it's very silly things for me. Like, I started getting rid of a lot of my music collection, just stuff that I bought things just to fill the gap in that chronological order of a band's career. The shit album, but I bought it anyway. And I probably bought 3 versions of that album. You know, just became overly obsessed with this stuff. And it was fantastic for a long period of time there. But then I realized I had to shed some of this weight in my collection. But then I told myself that I could, you know, if I find a drive or an urge to later on to go back and hunt for these things again, then that will be fun and I'll do it. But at the same time, I've told myself that I may never want to either, and that's okay.
It's an interesting thing you bring up, because I'm doing similar kind of thing in my life where I'm going, and again, it's probably because of the time. The timing's probably not that unusual, but I'm going through this major just like house cleanup and, you know, just shedding every piece of junk or unnecessary crap that, you know, that we have in our home. And I think it's very much aligned to this idea that, you know, you're going to shed all the stuff that's tying you down. And it's funny because so much of technology is, particularly in that respect, is viewed through the lens of negativity. You know, we look at technology and we go, oh, it's making us more divided, it's making us more busy and more overstimulated. But then on the flip side, like, you were able to declutter your life because of technology. Like, you probably stream all your music now.
Absolutely.
You know, you have digital copies of them, whatever else. So, like, it's funny. I do like to look at situations like that and go, okay, well, there is a positive element here. You can be at one with technology and at one with the peaceful side of the world at the same time.
Oh, right? That's it. I mean, I think a lot of this stuff is just finding that balance. It's not on either extreme, and it's that dead center. It's trying to find a balance, which is extremely hard to do and achieve. But, you know, for me, from a convenience point of view, I looked at and thought, to streamline my life, I automatically, anyway, and I've been doing it for a decade, is every time I bought a CD, I would digitize it straight away. And for me, the CDs were a trophy that sat on a shelf, and I could look at it and go, oh wow, man, how impressive is this collection? And when a mate comes over, like, oh wow, look at this. And then I moved and I bought a house down the coast, and then I put everything in plastic boxes and containers and carefully took them down, and then I put them in the shed, and I just never got around to putting them on a shelf. And I just thought, why?
You start to realize, are they in your life because you couldn't be bothered, or are they in your life because they serve a purpose?
Absolutely. And so I looked from a very practical point of view, but then I started going through these tubs of CDs and stuff that I'd held I cherished them. They're like these little pieces of delicate, these artifacts from my life. And I'd look at a CD and go, I remember buying that CD when I was 16 at, this store in Brisbane, blah, blah, blah. And I remember the person who sold it to me who was a bit of an asshole, but blah, blah, blah. And I've got this story attached to it. And then suddenly I realized that I've held on to these things, not so much for their practicality or their tangible use, but the memories that are attached to it. But then I remember that same album, if I'm not looking at the physical CD and I'm talking to somebody in conversation about a Megadeth album or whatever it might be, that I've got the story already there.
Yeah, that's right.
And I don't need that thing. And so I was holding on to it out of this desperation that I would lose the memory. And then I looked around my entire house and I thought, what crap have I accumulated where I'm looking at it to make sure that I don't forget something? And I thought, if it's really that important, then I won't forget it. And if I forget it, then I forget it. Like, I don't even know. Like, I've forgotten it. So who gives a shit? So,
yeah, and the funny thing is, if you were exercising your memory on a more regular basis to recall those good times, you wouldn't need the physical reminders around your home.
That's it.
But it's odd me saying that, because as we sit here in my office, it's covered in collectibles and memorabilia. But
I think there's elements of that where it's completely fine, and I think it's actually really good to have those things.
So this used to be my entire house, and then a combination of cutting down and also my wife just saying once and for all, can we get the Harry Potter wands out of the lounge room? Or can we get the Star Wars, memorabilia out of the lounge room? If you want, just put one picture on the wall, all right? Something tasteful.
Yeah, something a little bit more balanced that everyone can appreciate.
And can you take it out of the box, because it looks like you're running a toy shop? That's the other thing. That's the other thing. So you'll notice that now I have some select pieces that are out of their plastic, and others that are very much still wrapped in plastic.
But it's going back 10 odd years or 15 years, and living in the bachelor pad and having all your stuff and these items that you cherish, and this was your identity, this is all part of you. And so when someone came over, it'd almost be like going back to school, show and tell. It's like, check out who I am. This is who I am. It's like people that drive around with bumper stickers on their car. They want everybody else to know
that thing about them,
what their identity is. I associate with this is who I am. And that's great, and people should feel passionate about it. But I think when you become a slave to it and you become caged by those things, those items, that's when it gets scary.
See, I worry that's what social media is doing.
Yeah,
I worry that that's the negative side of it. And for myself included, you present an image to the world, and you are constantly having to reinforce it and remind people. And whether that be signaling your virtue, whether that be ensuring that people understand that you are for this cause, or that you look a certain way, and that's the funny thing. I think most of it does actually link back to, you want to feel that the world knows the good things you stand for. Yeah. Right. Yeah. More than anything, I think that's what it is.
Yeah.
Because as you say, it could be a bumper sticker. If that bumper sticker is a Sea Shepherd sticker, there is all of these implications.
That's it.
There's all these inferences that come with that about the kind of person that's in that car, and we do it knowingly. But it's no different to the clothes we wear, or the hair,
absolutely,
the hairstyle we have, or the tattoos or jewelry or whatever. So yeah, it's really interesting to see that no matter what the tool, no matter what the mechanism, we're still the same creatures we've always been.
Always.
We're still the same peacocks, flashing,
always.
Our colours.
I'm one of the biggest peacocks out there.
You are, definitely.
My frills and everything. But it's just, and that's an ongoing challenge and a battle, and in a good way. I think it's rewarding to sort of have those moments of self-awareness where you sort of go, I don't need to do that. And if I want to do it, then I find the right reasons to do it, not because I've felt a need to portray myself in a certain way to be accepted by a group of people that I might look up to or want to get validation from. And then once you start getting rid of a lot of that stuff, there's a lot more freedom to sort of just calm down and be yourself. But I think you have sort of walked a similar path to me where, you know, because of the lifestyle that you chose and the different things that you involved yourself with over the years, you know, being a musician and working with music, you know, what you've said a few times is that it's not, you know, you don't get into it for the money. There's not a lot of money there. And people can be really successful and very creative with, you know, creating businesses out of that, but it's really tough.
Yeah.
And so you've held another job that you've held for quite a few years, and it's a corporate job, and it's a 9-to-5 job, and obviously you got the on-call aspect as well. But I've certainly done that over the years as well. Have you struggled with, this is something I've struggled with, having those different identities? And, you know, like quite literally, when you are walking into a 9-to-5 job, would you make a conscious effort to not acknowledge the other things in your life and try and separate as much as possible so they don't blend over?
It's interesting because I have gone through different phases and at different companies and in different roles. You know, I've had everything from people being shocked and surprised but positive about the fact that I'm, you know, I've sung in death metal bands and you know, done tours and stuff like that around the world, and then on the other end, I've had people come up to me and not even know that about me and say, you know, you're not going to sell anything because you've got a beard, you know, and judging simply just, you know, the presence of facial hair. So I don't know if that's unique to the corporate world. I just think that's unique to just, you know, there's a spectrum of judgment, you know, within the human race. Behavior. It's human behavior. That's right. But I think it's funny with when I started doing the makeup and stuff for Daemon Pyre. That I think was probably one of the moments where I was like, you know what, I'm going to totally be just that's me outside of this place, which is one of the reasons why I enjoyed doing it. I enjoyed the theatricality of having a secondary persona. Which is odd because at the same time, I also very much owned that persona as me. Like I was just amplified. A grimy version of me. You know, it was just wearing all of my misanthropy on the outside. But when people would ask at work, I wouldn't offer it freely, you know, the way that I used to when I was younger. I'd be like, hey, I'm in a band.
It's like the second sentence, like, oh, by the way, I'm in a band. It's like, oh, thanks for telling me.
And you were proud of it, but you were proud of it in a like a youthful ego kind of way, rather than being proud of the accomplishments and the music and the creative side of what you were doing. Whereas now, as I've gotten older, it was like, I wouldn't offer that information. And again, partly because of protection, like you don't want to be prejudged about your capabilities in a new role or whatever. But at the same time, also just because it was exhausting, you just didn't want to have to explain to every new person that you meet that I'm this person, but I'm also this person and this person and this person, and I wear these different hats for different reasons. And so it was fun sometimes, you know, people would go off and they'd discover it by accident or, you know, like on a couple of occasions I'd have people say, oh, their friend or their brother or sister was into the band or into heavy metal more broadly and thought that they recognized me from something or whatever. Which again doesn't happen all that often. It wasn't like, you know, what I did was super, super well known, but every once in a while it was a fun thing to have happen. So, but yeah, there is a strange, I guess, balance to be struck between, you know, trying to appease the corporate mentality and trying to be just yourself. In fact, you reminded me of the conversation that I had with Jessica Pimentel on the show, which she has that same issue, you know, like we talked about that. Like she's this actress on Netflix, and then she's also a death metal vocalist who, you know, is dating the drummer from Meshuggah and plays violin and plays guitar and just rocks the shit out of everything she does. And, you know, it was funny because when I interviewed her, it was in the afternoon at a hotel, and she's in like, you know, black jeans and leather jacket and just totally looking the part of the rocker. And she and I were laughing because like that morning she'd had to go and do like Kiss FM and The Project and Studio 10 and had to wear like a pink, you know, like what they call pencil skirts or whatever. I don't know fashion, but
no.
like you know,
I think I know what you mean.
You know what I mean? But she had to like toe that line, you know, I remember saying to people, what really irked me about that was like, she is fiercely and proudly death metal. And I don't know her that well, but her reaction, I think, to the way that our mainstream media treated that other side of her life, I think she would have flipped out. Like, they played like small sections of her playing bass with like a bullet belt on and stuff like that, and they will laugh in like a pandering way. And I think that, again, is kind of why you as you get older, you become a little more protective, because you do have this side of you that says, I need to earn money, I need to generate a living, I have to have a career that may be, in the corporate space. And that frequently, particularly in Australia, is at odds with any kind of acceptance of anything creative. And if you need any evidence of that, just look at the fact that all of our major newspapers will devote 10, 15 pages to the sports, but the arts are nowhere to be found.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's a cultural thing in Australia. I've said that before, and I'll say that again. Like, I think there are lots and lots of creative, artistic people in this country, and people that also equally enjoy the creative arts. But our mainstream media machines, for the most part, they either disregard it entirely, or if it doesn't fit a particular mold, if it's not a particular style or a particular narrative, or if it doesn't subscribe to a particular political ideal, then they're just not interested.
That's it. Not interested whatsoever.
And moreover, what's worse is that they're patronizing. Oh, how cute. You sing in a death metal band.
That's a nice little hobby.
Yeah, nice little hobby you've got there. Let's talk about the real stuff.
That's right.
It's like, fuck you. That's not at all like how it is. And it doesn't matter how many records North Lane or Parkway sell, they're just not listening. Like I read an article the other day that my mate Youngie posted about how, I think they were saying that Melbourne is like the hub of, ticket sales, and it's outselling every sporting event combined with live music. And it's like, and I posted on it saying, I wonder if the Daily Telegraph will give over their last 10 pages to the arts now. That's never going to happen. No. And what annoys me most about that is that, like, sport is just another form of entertainment. At its core. I mean, there are secondary things that we get out of sport, like teamwork and leadership and companionship and health and fitness and whatever else. But at its core, as an industry, it's designed to entertain, right? That's no different to music.
Absolutely.
So why is it that we don't balk at the idea of a Canterbury Bulldogs player earning $200,000 a year? But then if a musician goes, hey, can you pay me $50 for the night? That's considered faux pas. When in reality they are one and the same.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean,
anyway, I just went down a complete rabbit hole. Sorry.
No, look out. Let's dig ourselves out of this one. No, but I mean, you'd be the same as me. You grow up where through school it's very sports dominated. Music is like this little optional thing that some people might get the opportunity to dabble in. As a tiny little unit in the grand scheme of things, but sport was always a mandatory thing, and there's definitely benefits of having it mandatory from a fitness point of view and getting out. True. As you said, leadership, teamwork, all that kind of stuff. But creatively, from an artistic point of view, even just sort of art classes and music was always like this add-on, this extra thing that if you wanted to do it, then you could do it in this limited period of time, and that's it. And getting out of school, and for me, like, I had this epiphany like at about 14 years old, where I discovered Metallica and just went, my life's just changed forever.
And Justice for All.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's it. And I sat there and just went, nothing here is of interest to me anymore. I checked out. And much to my poor parents, like, they had to cop it, but I couldn't balance life. It was just music. It was metal, and it was playing guitar, and it was me wanting to be the next James Hetfield and rocking out in front of a mirror in my bedroom. But then, wanting to grow my hair out and wear band shirts.
You sink right into it.
Yeah, everything. Like, I became obsessed. But I was still going through, the latter parts of high school, where there was the expectations of, the people that were put up to school captains and of those higher statuses within those grades were people that were heavily involved in sports, and obviously people that were performing really well from an academic point of view also. But anybody, I mean, I did did music classes, I learned guitar, and everyone knew that I showed interest in this, but it was never supported.
Yeah.
And so then I got out of that, and that was a real struggle getting out of high school. And then I started to get into the workforce, and I had long hair, and I cut my hair once, I think towards the end of high school, but then just never cut it up since then.
Yeah.
And so I've constantly gone into work environments, and I've been really lucky that I've had a really good sort of career in corporate environments and done really well. But just the narrative all the way along is like, let's point out the most obvious thing being your hair, and let's start there, and let's create a bit of banter. And I still got people I work with now that's like, oh, when are you going to cut your hair? And I go, I don't know, when you like stop being a fucking cunt, like, you know, just. But there's these old school stigmas that stick there, and they stick there, and I joke, and it's not terribly tasteful, but I'm just waiting for some of these older people just to die off, because, you know, I think the younger people coming through now, and there's still a lot of that's ingrained in your product of your environment, but I think a lot of businesses now are focusing more on EQ rather than a skill set that's been developed, or, you know, your achievements through other realms of society, and innovation and creativity are becoming far more valuable. And I've only just recently started to blend the worlds together and start not proactively telling people, oh, by the way, I do this and this and this, but when the conversation sort of naturally goes into a direction where I can throw in the fact that I do a podcast or a couple of podcasts, and I've got the band and all this sort of stuff, it actually works in my favor now, because I'm demonstrating behaviors that are actually of benefit to the company. Whereas, you know, creativity, innovation, thinking outside the box, being ambitious and trying to do things to upskill yourself. There's self-awareness and personal development, and they're the qualities that a business or any organization wants.
I would agree that definitely in the last 5 or so years, I've seen something similar.
Yeah.
Like the desire for social and emotional intelligence in people in the workforce, I think, is becoming far more obvious. And so in more recent years, I think that's another reason why I've done the same. You know, you're not afraid to say, hey, I'm multifaceted. You know, I have interests that extend beyond this thing. And I think that as we shift into a different era, like industrial, a different technological and industrial era, that's going to become more important, right? As more jobs are lost to automation, the one thing that AI isn't quite yet able to steal away from us is our raw human energy and our raw human creativity and emotion. And that's why I think that skill set, or like not a skill set, but that set of characteristics is becoming more and more important than it was before.
It's really valuable.
Yeah, that's right. So, but I do worry too that we're going to go too far to the other end. You know, the EQ will be, and already is, like the most important thing.
Well, that's when
striving for diversity and striving for, you know, all of these targets that we set for ourselves. If we tip the scales too far and the pendulum swings too far, and how many other mixed metaphors can I throw in? It will become the same set of problems, just at the other end of the scale. Well,
then you got a bunch of bullshitters that are running everything. They've got the gift of the gab.
Yeah, nobody gets anything done.
They don't know how to do anything.
Everything's conceptual. Yeah, you know? It's funny because I say this to my wife all the time. Like, she's point A to point B, and I'm the strategist. Right? She will get things done like no man's business, right? She gets from point A to point B. She'll bruise her leg or drop a plate or, you know, break 10 things to get the job done, but the job gets done. Whereas I'm the one going, watch out for that thing, and let's plan 6 steps ahead. But then sometimes the job doesn't get done. You know, and I think like humanity is made up obviously like a huge scale, you know, of different types of people, and all sitting somewhere on that spectrum. But you're right. Like, if we just go down the EQ path, there's just going to be a lot of hand holding and a lot of crayons and a lot of a lot of emotional awareness. But sometimes you need someone to, you know, kick things into gear too.
That's right? You need that operational element as well.
That's
but
right.
It's, I mean, you know, we touched on it, and I'll fix on it for a bit. But the whole sporting analogy of working in a team, you've got different positions that do different functions. You know, you got people that are naturally fast and agile and light on their feet, and then you got people that are just, you know, could practically be dead weight, but they are, you know, working best in a defensive mode. And you got other people that provide other functions for a team, and together collectively you achieve the outcome of whatever that goal is to win, you know, that that match, that game, or whatever it might be. But you can't just rely on a team full of, lightweights who, it's not going to work. But you need the combination of different elements there. So yeah, I think at the moment EQ is really important, and it's becoming a big focus, and it's great for people like me who I have a bit of a gift of the gab, and it certainly helps me, and I've got enough, I think, developing, as always, self-awareness that I can sort of sit back a little bit and watch things. But I'm not an overly analytical guy. I'm not overly technical. And when I come to those sort of scenarios, that's when I shut down. And that's where my limitations are. And that's when you need somebody who's just black and white, has no element of emotion whatsoever, and they're just a numbers person. Then you just go, here's this painting I've put together, and here you go, like turn it into something, and then you just you do it over there and just get away from me. But and also going back to like the identity thing we were talking about before, with the increase of AI and a lot of sort of technical jobs becoming, automation kicking in, where potentially technology can do the job of 10 people, you're gonna have a lot of people that are forced to become creative or actually focus on things that they want to do rather than what they have to do, which can be incredibly exciting. I think there's a lot of problems or things or solutions that need to be found to be able to accommodate that. But, if you think about your stereotypical barbecue with family, friends or whatever, and people that you met for the first time, and you're sort of gauging, you're trying to create a conversation, you're trying to think of things to talk about, one of the first things that people do is you go, oh, what do you do for a living? And because we do that because I want to try and work out where you sit in the grand scheme of things in society. Are you somebody that's above me or below me or on the same par? And then based off that, then I've created a narrative as to where I pigeonhole you, and then I'll talk to you accordingly, or I'll make a decision not to continue talking to you.
See, I'm gonna take an unusual tact for me. I'm gonna play the optimist here, rather than the pessimist, which is what I would generally do. I actually think it's more that it's the one thing that, by and large, you can guarantee you're gonna have in common is that you'll have an occupation. Yeah. So I think as a conversational tool, I think you can walk into any situation, any social situation, and by and large, expect that someone that you're talking to that you've never met before has a job. I think that's probably why we walk into those situations and go, what do you do for a living? I think there's probably an element of that ass hattery that you suggested earlier, which is that like people are going to just judge people and put them in a social standing, because we are hierarchical creatures, right? Like we understand that there are those above us and those below us, and whether that's at a primal level or whether that's in a social level or whatever. But I don't know, I personally think that when I walk into a conversation, speaking for myself, when I say to somebody, so what do you do for a living? I'm genuinely interested to know what it is that they spend their time doing. And I think more importantly, for me, I find it most interesting to see whether or not their response shows a complete disconnect with their passion, or if it's something that they're doing that they're incredibly passionate about. And I want to talk to those people. Because I'm like, how did you do that? How did you line up the thing that you get to do to earn money with the thing that you think is useful, in this world, in your life? Because I'm like, I want to learn from that person as best I possibly can. Because
I've heard a few people talk about this, and they use that sort of scenario of people asking what they do to try and work out their identity and get a bit of a picture, and people try to reframe it and use a different language and say, like, instead of what do you do, it's like, what are you into? And I love the idea and concept, but far out, that would feel so wanky to say, hey, nice to meet you. What are you into? And it's like, what am I into? Well, I'm into, I don't know. And then it's much easier.
It may feel like you've actually walked into the wrong kind of party.
Yeah, that's right. And where's the bowl of keys?
That's right. Where are the keys? So I think, you're right. Like that, it's a very loaded question if you open it up like that.
That's it. Absolutely. And I think also learning how some other cultures size each other up as well. So, while I won't try and paint an entire culture with the same brush, but I know just from friends of mine that have lived in China, one of the things that a lot of people do when they meet for the first time is they ask the question around money. They want to know how much money you make, and it's not an invasive or rude question to ask. It's just a socially accepted thing, because what they're trying to do is understand who am I speaking to here.
Yeah.
And then they, unfortunately, but for them it's not an issue, they will then make the decision as to how I converse after that. And I think we do it a little bit subconsciously with job titles and industries and things like that, but it's probably not as judgmental as some other cultures have, as far as working out where you sit in society and what little I don't know, little alcove or pigeonhole you exist in.
But I think cultural ignorance, though, is at an all-time high. Which is weird, because we spend so much of our time as a species listening to social commentators talk about the need for, multicultural values and diversity. Yeah. And yet, if you want to learn more about a subset of humanity and you ask questions about their culture, it could easily be misconstrued as coming from a negative place.
Yeah.
Which I think is really odd, because I think as it's, we've had this conversation before, and it's probably obvious that conversation is important. If you shut down conversation, you're going to get nowhere.
Yep.
No matter what the situation, no matter what outcome you're looking for, if there's no more dialogue, there's nowhere to go.
Yep. Yeah.
And it's so odd to me that we're now living in an era where, particularly in our Western cultures, where our attitude is, I don't want to hear from you. I just want you to agree with me.
Yeah.
And it's well, no, I want to learn about you.
Yeah.
I don't care what it is about you that makes you different or special or unique. I just want to know what it is.
Yeah.
And I want to be able to talk about it and learn about it.
Yeah.
Like, when did that become misconstrued with bigotry or racism or sexism or ageism or some kind of discrimination? To say, I'm actually really interested in what makes you different from me. There's this immediate implication that when you ask somebody a question about their identity, whatever that happens to be, that A, you shouldn't ask it because that's socially unacceptable, and B, that by asking it, you're implying something. It's like, no, I just want to know.
What's your agenda?
What's your agenda?
Yeah,
and I think the whole world is filled with people who are now just so afraid of either, on the one hand, being marked as a bigot, and on the other hand, afraid of becoming a victim. It's like, where'd the center go?
Or you've got other people that their natural instinct is to find a way to, I hate using this word, but I'm going to use it, you get triggered. It's such a buzzword.
See, there's a word we lost.
I know. But it's, people want to be offended. There's an adrenaline rush that comes out of jumping on the bandwagon and kicking someone while they're down as well. There's a bit of a tribal.
Easy.
It is.
It's easy to be a victim, right?
It is. Yeah.
And I don't know how we got to that place where, okay, I don't know if this is me just really getting on a bad path here, but I'm going to do it anyway. We, at the moment, a lot of our discourse, when it comes to social cohesion, is around things like feminism, right? I look at the war that's being waged in feminism right now between the second wave and the third wave, and I think that demonstrates exactly what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. We have a generation of women that were tough as nails and that, fought for their rights and were not at all prepared to take no for an answer, and really who we have to thank for much of the equality in our world, right? And then we have a new wave coming through, and their attitude is, no, protect me from everything, create laws and policies, and I want the government to get in here because I'm afraid, I'm upset, I'm a victim. It's like, I don't, how did that happen?
It takes it the other way, because it gets to a point where you've gone, well, once again, this is this common theme that we've got today. It goes from one extreme to the other. Yeah. And
it's funny, we are literally having a conversation that's ping-ponging around every kind of conceivable topic, but yet it all centers around balance.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like the human desire for there to be some kind of balance. I've often made this, fairly glib comment, but like, if you need any further evidence of why balance is important in a human life, you look at the two things that give us life, right? Air and water. If you have too much or not enough of those things, you'll die.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Right? And I think that in and of itself, as elemental as that sounds, is exactly what we're talking about. So much more of our world would be better if people were prepared to accept that the middle ground, right, is important. And I think this is why, my friends and people would know, I rant about the war against the moment in the psychologies around compassion versus empathy.
Yep.
And I think compassion is like that. I think is going to be the thing that's going to be the rule book for the next 50 years of social development. Like, instead of drowning in vicarious experience, right? Why not just treat everybody with compassion? Why not say, you may be different, we may be completely different, but I'm going to just respect the fact that you are a person trying to figure out your way through life. Like, that's what compassion allows you to do. Whereas empathy allows you to fall victim to bias, and it allows you to reinforce toxic, ideas. And simply because you think that you're helping the person whose pain you're feeling, when in reality you're drowning in that rather than helping them solve their own problem, right?
Well, that's where it comes down to that perspective. Being able to put yourself in that other person's shoes and understand, or get even just to try and grasp a bit of an understanding of why they feel the way that they do, and whether that be an opinion or a belief or whatever it might be. And as warped and as cave-like as some people's beliefs are, you have to sort of take a step back and go, but why? Like, why do they feel the way that they do? And sometimes sometimes people, the way that they react violently or whatever it might be, is them trying to protect something that they feel is important to them. And it could be a product of their environment. It could be the fact that they just never associate with anybody outside of this collective group of people that share the same core beliefs, or they've lived in the same. It's like I spoke to someone yesterday, and we're joking about living in regional parts of the country, and we both grew up in central Queensland, and we were just hanging shit on people that never moved out of these little towns. And I see it down the south coast as well. And you just, you can't blame them for having these warped, old school, backwards views or beliefs, because if they've grown up in that environment, they're friends of the same people that they went to school with, and they've stayed friends with. They've all got the same jobs together. Maybe that's a family-run business or something like that. They never travel. If they travel, there's something exotic. Maybe, just maybe, it might be Bali.
That's pretty exotic.
maybe, and then that's it. But then when these big social questions and these topics come up, and now that we're becoming more connected and a lot more of this stuff is in everybody's face, then people don't know how to handle it. It's so foreign to them.
See, I believe that's because their exposure to new ideas is limited.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then it becomes an overexposure.
It does.
In the flick of a button, because they go from, you take the example you gave, of someone that grows up in a small community and has limited exposure to new ideas or new ways of thinking or new types of people or whatever, and then they sign up for Facebook. And all of a sudden, just all of these ideas, some of which are going to be diametrically opposed to the ones that they have come to hold very dear to them over the course of their life, just get switched on. So then, Mark from Toowoomba is listening to Pauline Hanson give a lecture about Islam, probably the least qualified person to have that conversation, right? And it can be someone on the complete other end. Then you've got Sue listening to Antifa about how to fight fascism using fascist tactics. It's like, okay, this is why compassion and compromise are important.
Absolutely.
Because it's not about the fringes. No. It's about everybody else that sits in the middle and kind of goes, you know what? I'm happy to compromise. I'm happy to learn about people that are different. I'm happy to have people have a conversation with me about what makes me different.
Yep.
When did we all become so fragile in a world that is so not fragile? It's so dangerous.
Well, everyone's trying to protect their home ground.
I think we've lost sight of. I honestly think we've lost sight of natural selection, right? And its function, right? It's like, if we just let people walk out in the middle of the street and get hit by a car because they want to. All right,
that's right.
They didn't want to live. Well,
that's it.
And I get the argument that we need to protect people from themselves sometimes. Like, I get that, but
once again, balance.
Like, how is that such a hard concept that you can be compassionate, right? And you can care about making the world a better place, but you can do it and not have it be at the expense of other people, you know? And that's where I honestly think, I mean, this is why I'm a subscriber to horseshoe theory. You know, I think the further towards the fringes you get, the more they become the same.
Yep.
And we see it every day, whether it be socio-political, whether it be religious, whether it be, it doesn't matter what it is.
Yeah.
The further towards the fringes, the further away from being moderate and decent and respectful, you know, and centrist, the more you just become a raving lunatic, and the more likely you are to employ the same tactics as your enemy.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And have an enemy.
Yeah.
You know, if you're in the center, you're not really anybody's enemy.
Well, I think we were talking about, before we started recording, about flying under the radar, you know?
Yeah.
But I just think, I mean, the thing that sort of got me through a lot of those moments where I'm sort of battling my own monkey mind, and I'm like, no, fuck you. Like, no, that's not what I think. That's the complete opposite. You're a fucking idiot. And then I sort of stop myself before I start smashing my keyboard. And I realized that, well, hang on, their narrative, their story, their origins are completely different to mine. And
so do you see that as compassion, or do you see that as empathy?
Well,
do you see it as a blending of the two?
Well, maybe it's a blending of the two, because I see it as compassion because I feel for them, and I have a level of respect for why they feel the way that they do. And maybe I'm getting the definitions a bit wrong.
Well, I think, like, I'm a big fan of Professor Paul Bloom.
Yeah.
And he's just written this book not long ago called Against Empathy,
yeah.
which is why this stuff's fresh in my mind.
Yeah.
He makes a case basically for rational compassion, right? And the idea that empathy is biased, empathy as a moral tool is not useful. And yet we've set the last few generations down a path where, from their schools to councillors to the office of the president, you know, or the prime minister, at every level, we've taught the last few generations that empathy should be your single greatest moral tool. And he makes the argument as a clinical psychologist that no, compassion is a far more useful moral tool because it allows you to see beyond the immediate emotional response. It allows you to see, and he uses the example that, you know, empathy is exceptionally biased. You know, and an example of that, you care more about your own child than you do about somebody else's. Yeah. But you care more about the child of a friend than you do about 10 kids you don't know. And then see, empathy doesn't work on scale, right? Like, you will care about a crying child who washes up on a beach who's seeking refuge from a war-torn country, right? But then if you apply that on scale to 10,000 kids every day who die in Africa, it becomes irrelevant, right? Whereas if you're compassionate, those 10,000 kids are just as important to you as the one. Yeah, yeah. Right? So I think that's why that book resonates with me, because I try to be as rational as I possibly can be, but I try to be as decent as I possibly can be. And I think compassion for me as a moral tool makes more sense.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe for me, it's getting a bit of understanding of the definition of compassion. But I look, for me, like, I have very sort of knee-jerk reactions to certain topics, and that comes from a product of my environment. So I'm very quick to sort of shoot particular theories down or particular beliefs and things like that. But one thing that I think I've, maybe with just a level of maturity and a bit of life experience, I think, at least if I'm using the right definition, I completely won't agree with somebody, but I'll at least understand that that person is just as important as I am, and that they need the same things that I need. But at the moment, they're feeling compromised because of certain situations that are foreign to them, and foreign maybe, you know, could be a good pun as well in some topics, but, you know, it is threatening them, and no one should feel threatened in a way. So I have compassion on a base level that we are the same people. Even though our paths are different and we come from different backgrounds, but we want the same basic elements. We want we want a level of security, you know, food, water, blah, 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 survival.
I think anxiety and I think having an understanding of what anxiety is, I think would actually be very, very useful. One of the things I've learned over the course of my life is to try and understand anxiety. And what I learned about it essentially is that it is your brain being tripped. You know, your amygdala being tripped because it perceives a threat, right? And then your brain responding because the hippocampus recalls instances that are similar where you've been frightened, and then your body and brain just kick into fight or flight, right? I think if we were all striving for more of that self-awareness and then more of that understanding of how our brains actually function, we could temper that. Because instead of responding out of that, perceived sense of threat, we could like dial that down and take control of our response and then respond.
Well, I mean, to put it on a really mundane example, I was talking to somebody else just recently, and we were talking about situations where, you could just be having a really shit day.
Yeah, well, that's very true, yeah.
Short fuse, low tolerance, you're snappy, you don't even half realize it, but you're on edge and your heart's racing a little bit and you can't even pinpoint it. You just don't even know what it is. And the fact that you can't even pinpoint it is even more infuriating, and you get more and more agitated, and someone's going, what the fuck's your problem? And you're like, oh, none of your business, shut up. And then you realize that actually I missed a meal today, or I didn't get enough sugar, or I'm dehydrated. Something that's so petty and trivial, but we create these stories in our head of that there's this big, horrible, overwhelming problem that causes a sense of being overwhelmed or, having a level of anxiety. And, that's not always going to be what the end solution is, or the source of the problem, but that's an example of something that the reality to it is actually minuscule to be able to resolve a problem like that. So when people create these big, overwhelming situations where it's critical and it's anxiety filled, when really it's something that a quick conversation with somebody.
That's the key though, right? Conversation.
Yeah.
And that's my whole point, right? And that's always been my point, whether it be what I was doing with the band, what I was doing with the radio show, or just existing as a person on this planet. I will always, always, always be an advocate for conversation, because I think the moment that you say there's nothing more to say is the moment that you've decided that you're going to give up.
Yep.
And that applies to everything. And that's what worries me about where we are sociopolitically right now, is that we've drawn battle lines, right? And we've said there are things you just can't talk about anymore. And to me, that is the single most destructive thing to the cohesion of any society, right? Any collective of people. If you say these are the things you cannot talk about, then you've already conceded. Like you've already lost the war for a sensible and decent society.
That's the great thing about podcasts,
just
to sort of bring it full circle, because, for me, there's a whole range of motivators as to why I decided to tap into it and start it and give it a shot. But not that I use it recklessly, but I approach a lot of conversations coming from a fucking a dumbass. I've got no idea. And I sit down with people and I'm completely overwhelmed by their presence. People that have had amazing backgrounds, a level of intelligence that I feel that I would never get to that level. And I sit there in awe, and I attempt, and I always try to, and it's more to cover my own self and give myself a bit of peace of mind, but I always premise it before we start recording and say, I'm going to ask you more than likely a bunch of really ignorant and dumb questions, but I'm fascinated.
But your role as a host is to do that.
Well,
you're playing the role of any one of a variety of different listeners.
Yeah.
In assuming that they know something, nothing, or a mix of in between.
Well, I envision me listening to another podcast and being too scared to ask a question and going, I don't want to ask someone that, because I think that maybe I should know that already.
But I'm sure you would have heard this. There's no such thing as a stupid question.
Well,
that is one of those sentimental statements
it's been said for years, but whenever, especially when I was a kid, I heard that one kid in the class that kept asking questions. Go, fucking shut up! You're fucking irritating. Of course, no, that's a dumb question, and you hold on to that. And I think this podcast thing has been, I should be able to naturally build up these qualities without it, but it's been a tool that's been able to help me break through a lot of those fears and those feelings of anxiety and these false narratives that you create around whether you're good enough, or whether you've got the right to be able to ask a question, whether you've got the right to question something about things such as equality, gender, race, religion, all those kind of things that become these sensitive topics. And I can sit there now and at least give myself the green light to say, you're okay.
The thing is, someone's going to judge you no matter what.
Well, that's right?
it. And the reason I agree with you, the reason why these platforms are so useful is because someone is going to love it, somebody's going to hate it, and somebody's going to be indifferent about it, right? But if you do it in a way that encourages conversation and encourages just respectful dialogue, then you can probably at least yourself go to sleep at night and say, hey, I tried.
Well, that's it. And if anybody takes it the wrong way, or they it negatively impacts them,
they will. That's the reality.
But that's something that they have to manage themselves.
That's right.
And at least if you can safely sort of approach it the right way.
Offense is always taken and never given.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the thing. If you walk into a conversation just with I've done it dozens and dozens and dozens of times, and I imagine I will continue to do so, right? I'm very interested in what motivates human behavior, which means I'm interested in, social issues. I'm interested in religion. I'm interested in atheism. I'm interested in psychology. And I'm not an expert in any of these things, but I love asking questions about them, and I love, formulating my own kind of ideas, and I think you don't have to be a scientist to have a scientific mind. Right? You don't have to be a scientist to appreciate the scientific method. You hypothesize, you test, you review, and again, that's not even the scientific method, verbatim. But if more people, I think, just were prepared to say, that's okay. You might say something that I don't agree with, or that I may find quote unquote offensive, but I'm going to let you say it anyway. Then the world would be far more functional than it is now. Because now we're just walking into an era where everything that deviates from a science set of ideas has become not only evil, but it's bordering on illegal. The idea, and that is so dangerously Orwellian that people are sleepwalking towards their own fascist dictatorial state, and they don't even realize it. It's like, that is why these comedians and these, social commentators are all so worried and are all getting up there and saying, guys, this is really important. You know why? Because you're going to wake up and you're not even going to know what's happened. And all of a sudden, saying the wrong thing is going to land you in prison.
Yeah, that's it.
And whether it be...
And which we've always associated with stereotypically certain areas of the world.
We associate the idea...
Things in the past.
We associate the idea that your speech can land you in jail or behind the end of a gun with tyrannical dictatorial regimes. And the idea that is close to happening or close to becoming a reality in Western cultures is more terrifying than I think people are prepared to admit. The idea that you are doing something good by punishing people for simply engaging in dialogue that may be at odds with your views on life, that's very bad. And that's why I think podcasts are important. That's why I think musicians are important. That's why I think, academics are important. And you can be one of those things. You can be none of those things. You can still see the value.
That's it.
And the more and more of us, there's a great show host called Dave Rubin. I'm sure you're probably familiar with his stuff. Dave is not, in my view, he's not the most articulate guy. He just asks really straightforward questions, but more importantly, he's just a facilitator of dialogue. He just gets really interesting people in a room and has a conversation. And the value of that cannot be understated. Nor, and the thing is, the glimmer of hope that I have is you're seeing more and more and more of that. More and more of these centrist, facilitators, and more of these just decent people saying, no, you know what, it's a challenging idea, but let's get together and have a chat about it anyway. And the more of that we see, and the more popular that becomes, the more steam that the more momentum that gains, the better the world's going to be.
Absolutely.
I've never ever understood the idea that learning more about something makes you less of a person.
It's a bit of an odd concept, isn't it?
But it is. But that's what we're saying when we're saying, don't talk about this thing.
That's it. Don't question it.
Don't question it. Don't talk about it. It's like, hang on, but if I understand it, won't I be less of a bigot? Won't I be less of an ignoramus? Won't I be...
You've got no right to question that or talk about that topic, blah, 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 which is another thing that gets
me more. I ranted about this.
Sorry, I hit a low one there.
You did hit a nerve. I ranted about this the other day. It is... I have a really stupid tongue-in-cheek phrase that I say all the time, which is, I don't need to be shot in the face to know I won't like it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You don't have to have experienced bad things to say, I want to do something to change it. Right? And the funny thing is that there are commentators out there now who are saying, you have no right to talk about this thing because you've never lived it. But yet so much of our positive social change, specifically in the West and beyond, but specifically I'm referring to the West, has come off the back of people who never experienced shit things standing up and saying, that's a shit thing and let's stop it.
Yeah, that's it.
Like, you don't have to have lived through shitty things to stand up and say it's a bad thing and we want to fight against it. Like, that is literally how most of our equal rights came about, is through people who never actually experienced it saying this is not good enough. We need to treat people better. So this idea, whether it be an argument about cultural appropriation or an argument about, well, you're a man and so you've never experienced it, or you're a woman so you've never experienced it, or, you're cis and therefore you can't have an opinion. It's like, no. If I want people to be treated with decency and just common courtesy and compassion, I don't have to have received the shit things that you've received to know that that's a good idea. It's not a necessity to having a conversation that you have experienced or lived through bad things. It gives you a unique perspective, right?
It does.
And that shouldn't be dismissed. And again, if you want to have a balanced conversation, you should invite all walks of life into the conversation. The danger is we're walking down a path now where we're saying we only want the people in the conversation that have experienced the shit things, and the people that could actually be your ally, you don't want them involved in the conversation.
That's it. Exclude them.
You want to exclude them. It's like, well, no, we're trying to get everybody together and get everybody on the same page about what are some universal, truths, some natural justices.
And the people that get excluded, it gets to a point where, they're the people who actually give a shit and want to contribute. And if they're not allowed to participate in any form, then that's when the care starts to dissipate.
Well, and the pendulum will ultimately swing.
Yeah.
Right? Today's minority, will become tomorrow's majority. The one constant in human life is change.
Yeah.
And the reality is that whether it's 5 minutes from now or 50 years from now, you could be, on the dominant position of a hierarchy and then wake up the next day and be at the bottom, right? Which is why, as I say, compassion matters, right? Just being a decent person matters. But dialogue also matters, right? Because it's the one way that you can influence other people to be better, and you can also have other people influence you to be better.
Find some balance.
Pretty much.
Start a podcast. Oh, well, I think that was pretty an intense way to wrap it up.
Yeah,
but I was just trying
that's going to happen.
I got you all rolled up.
You got me all riled up.
You
rubbed my belly and fed me some brisket.
But I think just to bring it back to what we started talking about with, you creating a podcast with CJ and having this music thing, and then as it progressed and it became a bigger thing, bringing in other elements to challenge or just to get people to listen to something a little bit different than your stock standard music show or something music related. Yeah. And I think just the freedom of being able to have a format where you can encourage speech and encourage conversation. And, obviously there'll be nuances to that depending on what you're doing and who that might fall under and who's helping you to put that project together. But ultimately the medium's incredibly powerful.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's growing. And hopefully more people use it for the right reasons, just to have conversation. And
the cool thing is you don't have to listen to anything you don't want to listen to.
Absolutely.
I think that is one of the reasons why podcasts specifically as a platform are so powerful, is it kind of reinforces and reminds people that you don't have to listen to things you don't want to listen to. Like, the choice is yours. That's the whole point of ideals like free speech and free thinking and critical thinking. You get to choose what you absorb and what you don't. And podcasting is such a great idea because you can then just put whatever your ideas are out there, and like-minded people can listen, or people that want to challenge themselves to think outside their own echo chamber will also equally have the opportunity to listen. But the way that the medium is designed, it by default says to you absorb it when you want, how you want, at your own leisure, at your own pace. And I think that's why it's powerful. I think that's why it's more so than a lot of other mediums. You can still function in the world. You can still ride your bike. You can still do things whilst you're absorbing, this audio.
It takes the pressure off. You're not sitting there being forced to take in information.
That's right. Whereas
and
YouTube's bombarding all of your senses. And again, that has a function. But I think the reason why the podcast is silently rising as an important method of conversation and the dissemination of information is because it can be absorbed in amongst a busy day. It's not requiring multiple senses, for you to absorb that information. And the thing is, there are different learning styles, right? If you're a kinesthetic learner, then you may not appreciate a podcast, but most people tend to respond to a conversation. And so the podcast, as opposed to say a lecture, where you're hearing, those inflections and tones and shifts and timbres that you're used to hearing in a conversation, you just naturally your ear is going to
retain more.
That's right. It's going to resonate with you more than a 3-hour dry, recited lecture.
Absolutely. So, yeah. And I think even just to be able to put something out there where you're exposing people to other ways of thinking as well. Yeah. So even the people that listen to this podcast, ultimately, a lot of them, initially were coming from my circles as far as like-minded music fans and enthusiasts, and then gradually I decide, let's get this random person on, and so suddenly people are still listening in, and then they make a decision on that episode as they're listening as to, this guest's a bit of a fuckwit, I'll just skip forward or go to the next episode, or fuck it, I'll just listen to it and get an insight.
One of the things I like is that people are challenging themselves to listen to things and read things that they don't necessarily agree with. And I used to be very pessimistic that was just not happening. But through my own experience of having run a show for a short amount of time, it was we did 34 episodes. Yep. And over the course of that, we interviewed a very interesting mix of people. And again, they were predominantly around, from the music community, or had a connection to the music community. But the ideas that we explored were far beyond that. And so, I got an opportunity to meet and talk with, and I'm talking not just about the guests, but a lot of the listeners were people that had a really interesting, rich mix of ideas. And, we would have people, hey, why don't you have a conversation about this? Hey, I really liked this thing, or I didn't think about it from this point of view, or I disagree, or whatever. And it's like, but the one thing that, in fact, I have to say, there was not one person there was not one person who gave us feedback on the show that was a straight up asshole. It was just like, fuck you, I don't agree with you. And I was like, that's unexpected. You think in a world today that you're going to get someone that's going to go, oh, I disagree, and this is why, and you're an asshole, and because of this. And I can only hope it's because we approach the show from a position of, we're not perfect, but we want to just have the conversation, and the more, and as long as that is there, the desire to just talk to people and have people talk to one another, then you can't ever go wrong. I don't think.
I don't think so. And I think you probably attract people that are already in a frame of mind where they are willing to absorb information and learn, and they're open-minded. And the people that aren't, if you even manage to get them to listen to begin with, most of them won't stick around long enough to be able to take in any information for them to even formulate or put together the effort to go and articulate that somewhere else and give a response. Most of the time, that's the wonders with the podcast, is that you just go delete, skip, move on, and that's it. And and most of the time people get a sense of where a conversation is going to go, or the topic, and most people don't have the time to go. And that's also the good thing about podcasts, is that there's reviews, but it's really hard to leave a direct comment on a podcast as you're listening to it. You have to log into Facebook, you have to open up the Facebook app or Twitter and then type it out. And by the time you get there, you're exhausted. Yeah. So, until Apple Podcasts or any of these big podcast players have like a live feed or, a comment section,
which will happen,
that will be very scary, because I think it's going to encourage some not nice behaviors. But optimistic side of things, it could be exciting as well. But until then, I think podcasts have got a unique format and a unique platform that encourages.
They kind of stand alone. in the universe of media.
That's
they
it.
have their own little space.
It's a little bit untouchable at the moment, but in a good way.
Yeah, that's right.
So anyway, all right, enough of all that. Well, I look forward to whenever you get back on, whatever you decide to do, and get back into music if you decide that that's going to be what your next things are down the track. But
as I said, man, honestly, I don't foresee a future where I will be away from music forever.
Yeah.
I love it too much. I find that it's just too important. I have since I was a 15-year-old kid, and did the same thing that you said earlier, which is you just get consumed by it, and every career goal or educational goal you had goes out the window because you just want to play music.
Yeah.
And that's very much me, despite juggling, always having a day job. But yeah, I don't foresee a future where I could stay away from it forever. But it may be in a year or two, it may be 5 years. I don't know. As I said, for me, it was important to just not put any parameters around what this looked like.
Yep.
It was just focus on the immediate requirements, which is, I'm going to have 2 children under the age of 3, a wife who needs my help, and a body and brain that does very much in need of, some tender love and care. And if I get that right, and our family gets into a rhythm, and that means that a year or 2 from now I can start up a new musical project or get involved in a musical project, then rad. But for me, with Daemon Pyre, and I say this specifically with Daemon Pyre because this was something that I look back on very positively about Daemon Pyre, was that when we set out with that band, we'd all been in bands previously, and some were still in other bands, and we said, this is going to be a thing where the definition of success is not going to be whether or not it's our full-time job.
Yep.
We just want to do the best we can, make a record every couple of years. If we can get overseas like once a year, awesome, spend some time touring, but just write really the best music we can, so that we enjoy it, that fans enjoy it, and that's it. And that was a lesson that it took me a long time to learn. Previous bands I've been in, I was so focused on the goal, and trying to drive the success engine that I lost the fun of it a lot of the time. And whereas Daemon Pyre wasn't like that. Daemon Pyre was, we're going to try and go as far as we can with it, but we're not going to set limits that are so high that they're just unachievable. And that's why, it was a hard thing to walk away from, because so much of it was so pleasant and so much of it was so enjoyable.
Probably a really good thing as well. I mean, you don't want to sort of get out of something just because you're completely burnt out from it as well.
Well, look, there was that.
You leave on a high note. In some elements, but I mean, you've also left it on a high note as far as what that band is all about and what it has done in what it is as a short space of time. And I think the fact that you're quite fortunate because you have, and this is a bit of an ego thing, but you put your name against things, you've contributed towards things that are out there and people can continue to enjoy in the future, and it doesn't even matter what happens now moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I got to say, Andy made me realize that to a point.
Yeah,
our lead guitarist, he's like me, he's fiercely opinionated and has lots of real strong views on things, and we both very strong personalities. But he was the one who made me realize that, you contribute something into the world of music, and it is literally a moment in time. It's there, and it's a footprint. It's a footprint, right? It's there for good, and whether you come back to it, and you want to continue the journey later, or whether you don't, it's there. It's done. Yeah. And you can be proud of it for what it is. You can go, and as you say, you can go back to it later, just like a record of a band that you were into, and you can go back and go, oh, I'm pretty proud of that. But then again, I've never been one of those musicians that was afraid to listen to their own tunes. Yeah. I've been in bands with people before who found that to be highly egotistical, that they wouldn't put on their own records, outside of having to learn a song or review a record before it was released. They wouldn't listen to their music because they saw it as being egotistical. And I'm like, but if you can't enjoy it, that's the creative side of me is but I dig it. And again, maybe it's because I was a vocalist. So there's an element of compositional separation there. Yeah. I was involved in predominantly the lyrics. I wrote the lyrics, I wrote the vocal arrangements, performed the vocal arrangements, but the melodic side, with a few exceptions and a few arrangement suggestions, that wasn't my area.
Yeah.
So I guess I can, simply by virtue of the fact that I'm the one at the end who adds my bit, I can listen to the thing being created by the team and be like, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Which I guess is different, to the other parts of a band.
Well, I certainly get like people that are heavily involved in the production and recording process and putting all the elements together. When an album's finally done and it's put out there, that they go, oh, fuck this. I do not want to listen to this ever again.
See, that's a different story.
which is different again. But, I think in the end, you create something that means something to you. And I think that everyone, even if you can't do it straight away because, the process or whatever it is has exhausted you mentally, I think there should be every right to be able to come back later and enjoy it, because that's part of who you are, and it's a time capsule. It's a footprint that you left behind. It's who you were and what you represent at that point in time. So it's pretty cool.
Definitely.
So we've covered every possible base that we could possibly think of.
Which, let's be honest, that was bound to happen.
Yeah, it was going to happen. I wrote some notes down yesterday and I thought, oh fuck, this is just going to go off on a few different tangents. Let's just roll with it. That's good.
Well, I enjoyed it, so thank you for having me.
Much appreciated. Thank you very much. Cool. Thanks, everyone. If you want to learn more about Sam and some of the projects that he's been involved with over the years, and anything that we spoke about in this epic long chats with Sam, which was so much fun, you can go over to the show notes at andysocial.net. As with all of the episodes that have aired on the Andy Social podcast to date, everything is over there. And I don't know what episode this is, 126 maybe? So there's 126 individual podcast episode pages on my website that are filled with a whole blurb about my guest, all the links to contact them and learn about them. There's embedded videos, there's links to buy products and things from these people. There is so much content there. So please go over, have a sticky beak and check out not only the show notes from this episode, but all the episodes that I've put out to date. So lots and lots of stuff over there at andysocial.net. So before we wrap up this episode, if you want to support this podcast, in addition to listening to me crap on into your ear right now, you can do a whole range of different things. One of the big things for me that goes a hell of a long way is leaving a review for this podcast anywhere on the internet. It can be the obvious places like Facebook or Apple Podcasts, or it could be, I don't know, like a random blog somewhere, or some whack job conspiracy theorist website, or some sort of weird religious propaganda website, or you could like troll an Amazon product review for some kid's toy and just, I don't know, throw a comment about the Andy Social podcast in there. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter, because it's all attention. It brings people this way. Any attention's good attention, in my opinion. So all that stuff helps. And if you want to be in the running for the free custom artwork from Jaden Pyre, you can, well, first of all, you should go to designbyjaden.com and check out what his artwork's all about. And if you are interested in getting some free custom artwork from Jaden, you just need to send me a screenshot of one of those reviews that you leave somewhere in the depths of the internet, and you'll go into the running to win that free custom artwork, which I will draw on Sunday, the 6th of May. Now, in addition to all that stuff, you can, what can you do? You can like, you can retweet, you can love heart, you can tag mates in all the social media posts, share the episodes around. You can buy a t-shirt from andysocial.net. You can shout me a beer via andysocial.net. You can do all these different things. They go a hell of a long way to support this podcast. It keeps it going, keeps me motivated. It helps me reinvest into extra things, bigger and better things, helps me get better guests as well. Lots of things. It all helps. So thank you very much for all the support you guys give each and every day, each and every week, each and every month, blah, blah, blah. You get the gist. I'm just running out of things to say. So that's my cue to get the hell out of here. Thank you so much for the support, guys. I might see you at the Australian Podcast Awards this Saturday. If you're listening to it in time, AustralianPodcastAwards.com to buy tickets. Quick, Eddie, wrap it up. Okay, until next week, guys, take care. Love yous heaps. See you later. Bye-bye.
You're ready.